There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from exhaustion. It's the silence of someone who smiles while something inside is quietly collapsing. You've probably seen it, maybe even in your own reflection. The way a person laughs just a little too quickly, changes the subject too easily, says, "I'm fine," in a tone so rehearsed it sounds almost convincing. Behind that sentence hides a lifetime of invisible labor, the effort to appear okay, to seem balanced, to seem strong, to seem unaffected. Because in a world that rewards composure, vulnerability has become an act of rebellion. So they learn to hide it, to disguise heartbreak as humor, fear as sarcasm, loneliness as independence. They master the art of existing like nothing is wrong. It begins subtly. They wake up and dress the part, put on the face that the day demands, and step into the rhythm of everyone else's expectations. At work, they're the reliable ones. With friends, they're the ones who listen. With family, the ones who don't cause worry. But when the door finally closes at night, the mask doesn't fall, it tightens. Because pretending becomes a kind of survival, and survival never really sleeps. Their mind becomes a stage of unspoken rehearsals. What to say, how to sound, where to look. Every gesture pre-approved by the fear of disappointing someone. Every silence filled with the echo of what they'll never admit. I am tired of being the strong one. People who pretend to be fine are often those who once had no choice. Somewhere in their past, honesty cost them something. Love, safety, belonging. Maybe as children they learned that tears made others uncomfortable, that anger was punished, that sadness was ignored. So they built an armor out of smiles, an identity made of composure. They started saying, "It's okay," long before they knew what that even meant. And with time, the lie became indistinguishable from who they were. The performance turned into personality. They forgot where the mask ends and where the skin begins. Psychologically, this constant pretense fragments the self. The part that suffers becomes hidden, silenced, treated like an unwanted guest. But pain that is buried alive doesn't die. It mutates. It seeps into tone, into posture, into small, involuntary details. The way someone sighs before answering, the way their eyes glaze over in crowds, the way laughter breaks too fast, like glass under pressure. The mind begins to divide, the visible one that functions and the hidden one that feels. Over time, the hidden self becomes a stranger living inside, whispering truths that can't be spoken aloud. And yet, there's beauty in their endurance. It's not weakness that keeps them quiet, it's love. They don't want to burden anyone. They believe that if they stay strong, they'll protect others from the chaos inside them. But that is the cruel irony. The very act of pretending to be fine distances them from the love they crave. No one can comfort what they can't see. No one can reach what hides too well. The world applauds their strength, unaware that it's the costume of someone starving for relief. Sometimes they catch themselves wanting to be found out. They hope someone will notice the tremor in their smile, the hesitation before, "I'm fine." But when someone finally asks, "Are you sure?" they retreat. The instinct to minimize takes over. They change the subject, laugh, deflect. Because exposure feels like danger, even when it's disguised as care. The body remembers every time vulnerability led to pain. And so it tightens before the heart even has a chance to open. They've trained themselves to flinch at kindness, as if comfort were a trap. The truth is, pretending to be fine isn't about deception, it's about preservation. It's the psyche's last defense against drowning. If they allowed every suppressed feeling to surface at once, it might destroy the fragile equilibrium they fight to maintain. So they ration their emotions. A little sadness at night, a little anger when no one's watching, a quiet moment of grief in the shower. Then they put everything back in its box before facing the world again. But the box grows heavier each day, and one morning it refuses to close. There's a moment that often arrives without warning. A song, a scent, a small act of tenderness. Something pierces the routine, and suddenly the wall cracks. They find themselves crying over something trivial, unable to explain why. It's because emotion doesn't vanish. It waits. It waits for a moment safe enough to appear. And when it does, it floods like light through a long, closed window. In that brief collapse, they're finally honest. They feel both relief and terror. Relief because the truth breathes again. Terror because once felt, it can't be unfelt. Most people will never see that moment. They'll keep believing the illusion because it's easier to handle someone who smiles than someone who breaks. Society prefers the tidy version of grief, the one that doesn't interrupt meetings or dinner conversations. So the pretending continues. The world moves on, and inside them, a quiet war persists. But if you listen closely, beneath every "I'm fine," there's a faint plea. Please let me be real, just for a while. That's the paradox of the human heart. It hides to be loved, and yet it can't be loved while hiding. The more perfectly someone pretends, the lonelier they become. Because connection requires truth, and truth is what they fear most. They dream of someone who can see beyond the performance, who can hold the version of them that trembles in the dark. But they've spent so long being their own audience that they no longer know how to step off the stage. And yet, somewhere inside, a small voice still whispers that it's possible, that the world won't collapse if they stop pretending. That maybe, just maybe, being seen isn't the same as being judged. This voice is quiet, but it's persistent. It appears in the stillness after crying, in the fatigue after holding too much. It says, "You don't have to keep proving you're okay." And in that whisper begins the slow return to authenticity, the courage to exist without armor, even for a moment. Sometimes healing doesn't start with grand confessions. It begins with silence, with one honest breath, with the decision not to hide how much it hurts anymore. Because every mask that falls, even if gently, lets a little more light in. And though they fear being seen, they're also longing for it. The truth they've been running from is the same truth that could finally set them free. They begin to realize that the world doesn't end when they stop pretending. That people don't always run from sadness, that some stay. The first time someone looks at them and doesn't believe their "I am fine," something inside shifts. It's uncomfortable, almost painful to be seen. It feels like standing under light after years in the dark. But there's also warmth there, unfamiliar and fragile. For the first time, they consider the possibility that strength might not mean silence. That maybe the bravest thing they can do is admit they're not okay. At first, honesty feels foreign, like speaking a forgotten language. They stumble through it. They overshare one day, retreat the next. They test the waters, unsure if they'll be punished for their truth. But slowly, they notice that authenticity doesn't destroy. It connects. It attracts gentleness. It creates space where understanding can breathe. When they stop performing, others stop acting too. Conversations become softer. Laughter feels real. The world begins to feel less like a stage and more like a home. The psychology of those who pretend to be fine is built on a paradox. They long for authenticity but are terrified of it. They fear the exposure that comes with being known, yet the loneliness of being unseen hurts even more. The mind tries to resolve this conflict by choosing the lesser pain, the safety of the mask. But healing begins the moment that calculation changes, when the cost of hiding becomes greater than the fear of being known. That's when the walls begin to loosen, not with force, but with quiet surrender. It often starts small. They tell someone, "I'm tired," They admit, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Simple sentences, but each one is a revolution. With every truth spoken aloud, the distance between who they are and who they pretend to be shrinks. And as that gap closes, peace, real peace, starts to slip through the cracks. Not the artificial calm of control, but the kind that feels like breathing after holding your breath too long. Psychologically, what they're doing is reintegrating the self. They're allowing the repressed parts, the fear, the grief, the tenderness, to return from exile. And while this process is messy, it's also profoundly human. The goal isn't to become invulnerable, but whole, to stop dividing the heart into acceptable and forbidden emotions, to live without disguises, because the truth, once embraced, is lighter than any mask. But the world still tempts them back into performance. It praises composure, idolizes resilience, misunderstands strength. There will be days when they relapse into silence, when "I'm fine" slips out automatically. That's okay. Pretending was once a form of survival. It deserves compassion, not shame. The difference now is awareness. They know the mask is there, and knowing is already a kind of freedom. There's a moment that always comes for those who stop pretending. They sit alone one night and realize that they no longer have to earn rest, that they no longer owe the world an explanation for existing. It's quiet, almost sacred. They look around and notice how the air feels different when they not trying to impress it. There's a slowness, a softness that life had hidden from them. The simple things, music, morning light, a genuine smile, start to feel enough again. And for the first time in years, they don't feel like they're acting in their own life. Somewhere along this path, forgiveness appears, not from others, but for themselves. They forgive the version of them that pretended, that stayed silent, that smiled while breaking. Because that version was never fake. It was protective. It kept them alive until they could be real again. Understanding this dissolves the self-hatred that often hides beneath perfectionism. They stop calling themselves weak for needing to be loved. They stop apologizing for feeling deeply. And what was once a performance becomes compassion. It's not that the pain disappears, it transforms. Sadness still comes, but it no longer feels like failure. Fear still visits, but it no longer dictates. Emotions lose their sharpness when they're allowed to exist. That's the quiet truth of emotional maturity. Peace isn't the absence of storms. It's the ability to stand in the rain without pretending it's sunshine, to let it fall, to get soaked, and still know you'll dry again. In that awareness, a new kind of strength is born, one that doesn't need applause or control. It's the strength of someone who can cry without shame, love without conditions, and rest without guilt. It's the courage of transparency, the wisdom of having touched their own depths and returning not harder, but softer. They understand now that pretending to be fine was never their flaw. It was their first language, but every language can be unlearned and replaced with truth. There's a subtle beauty in people who've suffered silently. They see details others overlook. They move with empathy. They know how to hold space for pain without rushing to fix it. Because they've been there, they know what it's like to need gentleness more than advice. These are the people who make the world bearable, even when they don't realize it, the ones who've mastered the art of quietly saving others while learning to save themselves. And maybe that's the hidden gift behind the struggle. The ones who've spent years pretending to be fine often become the ones who help others feel safe being real. Their scars become invitations. Their silence becomes presence. They don't preach healing. They embody it. In their stillness, others sense something sacred, the proof that brokenness and beauty can coexist. There will still be moments when the old reflex returns, when they hear themselves say, "I'm fine," out of habit. But now it's followed by a pause, a small conscious breath, and maybe even a smile. Because this time, they know the truth. They're not pretending anymore. They're simply learning how to be. So, if you're one of them, the ones who keep smiling through invisible storms, know this: you are not weak for hiding. You were protecting a heart that had no safe place to rest, but you're allowed to stop now. You're allowed to let the world see the tremor in your voice, the tiredness in your eyes, the longing behind your calm. Because what makes you human isn't how well you pretend, but how gently you return to truth. And maybe, someday, you'll look back and realize that the moment you stopped trying to be fine was the moment you finally began to live. That the day you let the mask fall wasn't a collapse. It was a beginning. The end of pretense and the start of presence. The rediscovery of yourself beneath all the noise. So breathe. Let the performance rest. You've carried enough. The world doesn't need another perfect face. It needs your real one. And your real one, with all its cracks and softness, is already enough. If you saw yourself in these words, just leave a single dot in the comments. I'll know you understood.